Thank you for auditing the always positive new music review show hosted by a French professor who almost every Thursday will feature an act that is a little bit less known on Thunderground Thursday. Now, I've actually gotten quite a few requests, including from the artist himself, to review the new album There Will Be No Super Slaves by Gais Guevara. I believe that's how you pronounce his first name. It's spelled G-H-A-I-S. And in order to sort of frame this video, I want to go back a little bit and talk about an interesting intersection. This is an intersection which is discussed, but I think it needs to be further explored. That is the intersection of white privilege and black militance. That's where this channel exists for a lot of the time. That's where I try to live a lot of the time, being the recipient of so much white privilege myself, and being so interested in and hoping to forward the cause of many black militants. In order to really frame this, I want to go back in history and talk about my family. This is a true story about my aunt. So my aunt was a very well-to-do woman, Aunt Martha, and she lived in D.C., Washington, D.C. She actually helped Marion Barry get elected back in the day, and in the early 60s, when Stokely Carmichael was going to Howard University, Stokely Carmichael, one of the most important figures in the Black Power movement of the 60s and late 60s, eventually married Miriam Makeba, which is interesting. Stokely Carmichael was friends with my aunt. And I think she helped him sort of at times, was a friend to him. She also employed him as a babysitter. My cousins had Stokely Carmichael as a babysitter. And there's the story that my father tells. He tells it quite often, where Stokely Carmichael had just given a very fiery speech, a very sort of truth-telling speech, which pointed out the fact that white people are the cause of a lot of pain for black Americans. And the story goes like this. My father, who was a good deal younger than my aunt, sees her pick up the phone and say, "Do you still love me, Stokely?" And this is always told with a big laugh from my dad, because it's kind of a funny moment, right? I mean, obviously they had a good personal relationship, and as individuals they were friends, but she represented everything that was evil and wrong in the universe, right? As being a recipient of immense wealth and power by the virtue of her skin. But the thing about this whole story that fascinates me is I've never heard the answer. My dad tells the story, and I don't know if he knows the answer. I don't know what Stokely Carmichael said at the other end of the phone. But that's how I often feel when I review music like this. Or when I spend time on my other channel really focusing on issues of racism and white privilege and systematic oppression as a beneficiary of white supremacy, which I am. I don't want to be, but I am. I'm in a very interesting position because I am very interested and, to my best of my ability, actively fight against that privilege that's been given to me. And one of the ways to do that is to take seriously, promote, platform, shine a light on black militants. But the issue obviously comes that if I'm using this power that is given to me to help people who hate that I have this power, and sometimes will even say that they hate me, what is that crossroads? I don't have an answer for you. But I really think it's a good question to ask. Because I'm not one of the good ones. I remember I was in a African American studies class in college, and one of the black kids in the class looked at me and said I was one of the good ones, but I'm not. I was only at that college because my grandmother went there. My grades in high school were garbage, so I was just a recipient of just white privilege. They had to bust their ass to get there. They had to work super hard to get to that place. I didn't. I just walked in. No matter how much I want to be one of the good ones, no matter how good-willed I am, no matter how hard I work in my college to be anti-racist, I started the hip-hop program, all that stuff, it doesn't erase the facts of my race. So, when I received a message from Gais Guevara to review his album, and by the way, I'm way too hot in the sweatshirt. I don't edit my videos. If you've never watched my videos, you might not know that. I just don't edit them, so you're just going to have to deal with that. Whew. Otherwise, you're going to have a sweaty professor on your hand. When I got this message from him, it said, "Are you interested in reviewing this album by an Islamo-communist?" Now, first of all, the term Islamo-communist is interesting, because communism is ostensibly atheist. So, part of me was kind of a wise ass. So where did you come down on the Afghanistan invasion by Russia in the 80s? But obviously, that's ridiculous. So it really kind of brought that up. And then when I'm listening to his lyrics, which are very good, very well written, but they don't pull any punches. And it reminded me of the experience I had growing up listening to Public Enemy. I listened to a lot of Public Enemy growing up. And I realized that we've really lost a lot because I was made uncomfortable as a 12-year-old. Okay? When I was listening to Public Enemy, I was made uncomfortable. When I was forced to listen to, through them, the teachings of Louis Farrakhan, I was made uncomfortable. I was made to think about my privilege in a very real way. I was forced to hear people who were essentially saying that they hate me. Do you still love me, Stokely? I was sitting there and having this imaginary conversation in my head and being told no. So we've lost as a culture, I think. Whatever brief moment that we had in the late 80s, that moment where a whole bunch of white folks were very open to ask the question, "Do you still love me, Stokely?" And when the answer was no, they tried to understand. They didn't stop their support. They didn't start crying about white genocide. So, let's get to this album a little more specifically. It's a good album. It's a short album. If you haven't listened to it, have a listen. I've seen a lot of people, throw around, it's the album of the year. I don't know if I'd say it's the album of the year, but it's definitely a really good album. It's one of the more interesting underground rap albums I've heard this year in terms of its production, in terms of its outlook. A great title, There Will Be No Super Slaves. I can't say that I fully understand what it means, but I understand what it means. You don't have to have a degree in African and African American studies to understand this album, but you do have to be a lot more familiar with African and African American studies than you have to be for most music that you listen to. There's a lot of very specific and interesting references, in addition to lots of interesting nerdy references. There's a lot of like SpongeBob and African history. Sort of a lot of those all mixed together. The front has an image of a Dahomey Amazon leader. So this was like a very powerful tribe in Africa that actually were very active in the slave trade themselves. So maybe this is an interesting sort of de-racialization of the slave trade. I don't know. And then above, what I assume is French soldiers attacking North Africans. France has a terrible history in North Africa. So already just as a professor, which I am, and as somebody who studied a lot of post-colonial stuff and all that, I'm just, wow. So we've got this name, we've got Che Guevara referenced, kind of a iffy character in world history anyways, as far as I'm concerned, but not that he's iffy, but just he's become a symbol of hypocrisy because so many people buy the t-shirts with his face on it. Anyways. And then I find out that this guy, Guevara, is from Philadelphia, which is fun. That's where my grandmother's from. The grandmother who got me into college, she's from Philadelphia. She's actually buried in Philadelphia. But it's fun, because Philadelphia is sort of this really oddly underrepresented East Coast city, even though it created gangster rap with Schoolly D, even though it created pop rap with Will Smith and DJ Jazzy Jeff, even though it basically perfected rap music where the music is played by the people themselves, being the Roots, even though Freeway is often put in a top 10 conversation of best MCs of all time, even though Eve comes from Philadelphia, still somehow Philadelphia is slept on as a city. So it's nice to hear this, coming from this place and with this perspective. Now, sometimes, whenever I talk about race issues, people will approach me and accuse me of something called white guilt. I just want to take a second to talk about white guilt. I'm not into white guilt. I'm a historian. Do you see the difference? Like, I don't hate men. I'm not a misandrist. but I am a historian. I do observe patriarchy. I do observe abuse. I do observe power imbalances. Like, it's not being saddled with white guilt that has me listen to someone who refers to me as a cracker and makes vague and sometimes direct references to killing people who look like me because they look like me. Like, that's not white guilt. It's just sort of being a historian. And I think this album in particular is interesting because it doesn't sound to me like it comes from a place of hate. It sounds to me like it comes from a place of history. And for that, and if no other reason, that makes it a particularly interesting album. So I'm recording this in my office. It's not quite as nice of a background. I do have lots of cool props that are going to be showing up, like this. So if you know this album, you're psyched for that. So this album, let's actually talk about the album. I'm 10 minutes in. Maximal. A very maximal. I don't know why I keep reviewing all this dense music. This music that's very hard to describe because so much is happening. But it's all produced and written by this one guy. So he's doing everything on here. Gais Guevara. I was kind of wondering if it wasn't pronounced like an Arabic way, like Gais, but I think it's just Gais Guevara. And it's filled with these great like little skits and funny skits and serious skits and funny quotes and serious quotes. So many interesting samples. You can really get lost, like just lost deep into the crevices of this album, trying to figure out like all the things. Unexpected references and also unexpected flow changes, even though I would say he does not have the most sort of remarkable flow, you know, like I wouldn't hear and go, oh, that's him. He's able to mix it up enough that an entire album of his music has enough variance that you're sort of never tired of it. So let me give you an example of his music. This is my stamp. Just click, I don't know, right above the Arc de Triomphe. We'll talk about France in a second. This ski mask ain't for COVID. This song is 4.5 hours long, and the 4.5 hours are fit into about 2 minutes. I don't know how he does it. So dense. Gentle guitar sounds to start, and then these synths come in, there's some metered out hi-hat sounds, and then it goes nuts. Almost, I think it's a klezmer sample. It's like this total party beat. And like totally unexpected. There's great percussion in the back, and then his flow is kind of a triplet flow, but a little bit more interesting, a little more dynamic than a typical triplet flow. He's sort of rapping softly over very hard words. And this is the lyrics that I'm talking about. This is what fascinates me. Crackers trying to tell what's funny, like they wasn't laughing at Blackface. If I say I'm gonna kill me a cracker, that ish no joke, it's a showcase. Might F around and impose Sharia law on the rap scene. So here we have this sort of very direct thing. This is what I'm talking about, this interesting intersection of black militantism and white privilege. Because it's ultimately white privilege that gave me the education to be here. That probably gave me enough money to be able to buy this phone that I use as a camera. And I'm using that to talk about somebody who's talking about killing me. I mean, not me specifically, but me in general. But again, when it's in this context, when it's talking about history, going back to blackface, the whole thing, and then in particular, what I love is later on in the song, he very much references saying, fetishize my trauma. And this is something I talk about a lot on this channel, how hip-hop music in general, when it goes wrong by existing to glamorize black trauma for a white audience. And you can't get around that. Because it can't be false. You can't lie. I mean, you can lie. But if you're telling the truth about your trauma and the white audience enjoys it, then that's what's happening. He also makes lots of weird references. Got more hits than an Andy Murray backhand? Andy Murray? The Scottish? For some reason, I'm just stuck on this because I was thinking about the number of syllables, right? So obviously, if this guy is coming across as a black militant and you're talking about tennis, right? Like Andy Murray, Venus Williams. Okay, so even if you want one extra syllable, Serena Williams, you could even have that. I guess you can't do Arthur Ashe, Andy Murray. Yeah, okay, you can't quite do that there. But I think it just sort of shows his dynamism, that you don't expect Andy Murray. I don't think any rapper in history has ever referenced Andy Murray. I barely even know who Andy Murray is. I'm pretty sure he's Scottish, if I remember that correctly. And then this beat, this wild beat, like doubles and becomes like the whole thing, because it's like a klezmer, it actually sounds to me like Jewish folk music, which I will definitely give a lot of credit to this album, that most rap albums that are made by people who identify as being militantly Muslim end up being overtly anti-Jewish. I'm not using anti-Semitic because often that term gets mixed up because, anyways, this album doesn't do that. I mean, it's pro-Palestine, but that doesn't mean it's anti-Jewish, I don't think. It's pro-Islam, but that doesn't mean it's anti-Jewish. So, I don't know. It's kind of fun having this sound, and who knows where he gets the sample. I will say his crates are deep. I don't know where he's digging from. But anyways, he makes it like a double time. So you really do feel like you're at a wedding, because like the dancing's getting quicker, and then his rapping is faster. There's all these high squeals in the background. And he turns Simba into Savimbi. Savimbi, who is a very complicated historical figure who helped liberate Angola. I hate to tell you, but probably most people who watch this video don't know where Angola is. They know it's in Africa, but if I said, is it on the East Coast? Is it on the West Coast? Is it north? Is it central? Is it south? They wouldn't know. That's the kind of depth that we're going here. West, by the way. Kind of southish. And then there's a full break and just a wild outro. These weird EDM sounds, this really sped up choral sound with his voice echoing in the back, beautiful rhythms. Just so much going on. Do you see why I'm saying it's a 4-hour song in 2 minutes? It really works that way. And then there's an outro with this wrestler. We'll get back to that wrestler soon. So let me go through the rest of the album a little bit quicker, with less contemplations on the nature of the intersection between white privilege and... Actually, I mean, it's fascinating to me because FD Signifier, my favorite YouTuber, who I talk about a lot on this channel, recently talked about this. And this whole question, I think, really is best exemplified in the passage from the autobiography of Malcolm X, which, if anyone ever asks me what book is the most important book to read, I say that's number one. It's the most important book an American can read, the autobiography of Malcolm X. But when Spike Lee dramatized it for his film, there's this, he does it quite well, there's this moment where this well-meaning white lady walks up to Malcolm X and says something to the effect of, "What can a well-meaning white liberal do for the cause?" And Malcolm X looks at her and says, "Absolutely nothing." And that's my question. Is that true? Is it? Did Martha actually help Stokely Carmichael? Am I actually helping with my small platform? Am I actually helping black militants? Am I? Or am I just profiting off of it? Or am I just trying to wash away my guilt? Or whatever? And, these are all real questions. That intersection. I feel like there's a lot of black militants who are doing the work on trying to analyze that intersection, and not a lot of people with that white privilege who are trying to analyze it. So let me be the one who does it. Okay, going into the intro. The intro is charming as hell. Okay, this guy's very clearly, even though he's a very serious militant who calls for the murder of many people on this album, he's also kind of a nerd. That's very clear. Great samples, this kind of plaintive strings. It starts off with kind of like a Muslim incantation in the beginning, a quote from Superintendent Chalmers, "Good Lord, what is happening in there?" from The Simpsons. Patrick, that's the first of a couple SpongeBob references. White supremacy, quotes Night of the Living Dead, "They're coming to get you, Barbara," and then eventually gets into National Anthem, and then, I hate to do this, I hate to do it, but he screws up. He makes a mistake. You know how Beyonce went back and took out the Kellis song from her thing? So he quotes this: "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure," which is a great quote. The problem is, I assume he thought it was a Mandela quote, which I thought it was too. I've thought this is a Mandela quote for 20 years. I have quoted this myself. I just happened to do some research. It was actually said by this kind of wacky white woman presidential candidate who's like a self-help guru named Marianne Williamson. But who cares? It's still true. Our deepest fear is that we're powerful beyond measure. Next song is called #FreeMir. Starts off with another sort of great, so many different quotes I can't place. And I think this, again, this album reminds me a lot of Public Enemy, not in the way that it sounds, like he doesn't sound like Chuck D and he doesn't produce like the Bomb Squad, but definitely the unsettling feeling that I get being at that intersection, which I think is a good intersection to be at. But just the amount of quotes. Like, I still don't know where Redeema Fura Karashaik comes from, like all the random quotes that are all over the place in Public Enemy, like here, bro, I don't give an F. I don't know where it comes from. I've managed to figure out where a lot of these things come from, but not all of them. But I also have to be careful not to sample snitch, which is a problem because, like, finding samples is one of my favorite things to do. Very cinematic strings, and then like a drill beat underneath, like that sort of drill bass line. Says he feels like Jigga in Tom Ford. I just love the song Tom Ford. Like, underrated Jay-Z song. Is Tom Ford not like a top 3 Jay-Z song? God damn, I love that song. I'd never even heard of Tom Ford before then. And he kind of like stops and then gets started again. He has his flow. It's a little bit like nasally and nice and attacking. It's a really good flow. He then gives a shout out to Bell Hooks. I don't F with these m's like Bell Hooks. I don't exactly know what he means, but it's always nice to hear reference to Bell Hooks. And then it ends with a quote from Fargo, and one of the best characters in Fargo, Mike Milligan, who talks about how in astronomy, revolution means returning, but on Earth, revolution means change. Beautiful, interesting. I get the sense this guy watches a lot of television and he finds a lot of very good, interesting ways to tie it into his art, which is good. These references aren't boring. How is Mike Milligan not like the most quoted figure in TV for rap artists? He's so badass and menacing and like, oh, he's great. The next song is The Stamp, and then gets to Patrisse Cullors, Stole My Lunch Money. Patrisse Cullors is one of the figureheads of the BLM movement. Not the movement, but the actual organization. And this is what starts off with the continuation of that wrestling quote. Now, this is something I've never heard before, and I am really thankful that I now see this. So there was something called Smoky Mountain Wrestling, which I guess was some kind of like amateur wrestling thing. And it's all in the American South, as far as I can tell. And there's these like 2 black dudes who are a tag team, and they're giving a speech. And it's like they're trying to antagonize as much as they possibly can all the racists in the South who are watching this. So they're playing the heel, right? They're playing the heel. But they're also being black militants. If that makes sense. Like, it's hard to figure out if they're saying what they believe or if they're not saying what they believe, but they're just trying to agitate. So to my homeboy O.J. Simpson, keep up the good work, baby. That's 2 less we gotta worry. What a heel line. I don't know. But it's a fascinating thing because I think that's a lot of the place that we're in. A lot of these characters, a lot of these characters in wrestling and these figures in hip-hop. And what are they saying? And are they saying it to play a role, or are they saying it because they want to affect change? I don't know. I'd never heard of these guys. The Gangstas was the name of them. But they have just become my favorite wrestlers. The whole song has a super blown out, like blown out voice and beat, very strange sample. I really love the way this otherworldly sample interacts with his voice. And then there's other samples on top. There's like a full break where we hear the words, "Get your hands out of my pockets." Which, if you don't know, when Malcolm X was murdered, somebody made a disturbance in the crowd and said, "Get your hands out of my pockets." It's a very disturbing moment in world history. It's a very disturbing moment in Spike Lee's movie. Still, like, I haven't seen the movie in probably 15 years, but I could just place it immediately in that weird building in LaGuardia, I think it is. And then it comes back with this like altered 70s funky, almost Daft Punky style sample here. So many great layers. Gotta be careful with the n's you choose to stand beside. Was stuck in the quagmires with dudes you would have considered family guys. I'm telling you, this guy watches a lot of TV. Crackers in a cold sweat, dreaming about our battle cries. I'm good with all the shooters and the hooligans be the family ties. So again, more of these interesting calls. Next song is called Pulchritudinous, which just means beautiful. Starts off with another hard-to-place quote about having to invest in yourself, a really slowed down, sleepy beat. And then he comes in. I don't know if I'm the only one who hears this. If you're a fan of Geist, Guevara, let me know. I hear a real Jay-Z style flow and beat here. An example of the kind of references that he makes, I'm like Al Iverson on Al Nakba, which is like the event when Palestinians were kicked out of the area of Palestine. So again, it's a sort of like Allen Iverson. Okay, so he played in Philadelphia, and he's an interesting sort of character, all these things. And then he'll throw in just a kind of funny line like, never see me again like Oedipus. This dude is making an Oedipus reference, but it's not about banging your mom. It's about the fact that Oedipus blinded himself. It's good. And then there's this really great part where in the middle of the song, there's this I'm just going to move my camera a little bit this way. Oh, that's so much better. Oh my God. Okay. Where there's this like backwards sound. And then there's this spoken word. And I had trouble placing where the spoken word where it came from. And then I realized it came from Muhammad Ali. This is a toy I bought in the 90s, by the way. I saw this I was walking through Toys R Us. And I was like, do they have a Muhammad Ali toy? So I keep this in my office. Because Muhammad Ali is like one of the great American heroes. Who's a greater American hero than Muhammad Ali? Seriously, you name me one. Anyways, so it's Muhammad Ali reading a quote of his, like reading a poem of his, but he's not in his like brash mode. He's in a sort of contemplative mode, and it's a great connection. A great connection to another great black militant Muslim figure in American history. Then there's a guest appearance by someone named Zen Dash, who's good. Has some good punchlines here. The dude seems to have a lot of substance issues. He talks about doing coke and heroin in his thing, which I guess is okay, but like, I don't know, like maybe get some help. I don't know. CRB is the next song. Talks about how Che Guevara really likes killing people. There's a quote from a YouTube video, which is kind of funny. A very super funky 70s soul sample, then kind of speeds up. Some punchlines here. Set them straight like a homophobic father. Funny line. Sped up in the chorus, a crazy guitar line behind the sample. And then really some of his best lyrics. And this is where I think he's doing his best lyrics. Because it's one thing to say, I want to kill white people, right? Which understandable. That's a lyric, right? But what I'd like here is he's really doing a better job of not being provocative, but of being illustrative, of illustrating the way that a lot of white people interact in black spaces. Them white folks talking about the city like it's just gay pride and fun, take lives and drugs, disciples of Hoover, spilling white on disciples of Hoover, money spent 2 weeks in the Ritz, then came home saying that they saw the pain and took it all in, tourist performances, hard to ignore the formulas, Canon cameras should catch the cannons they tote for foreigners, a real rain will wash the scum off the block, either that or water hose from a cop, don't know the half of it. So this whole idea of like white tourism and like feeling like you understand the city, but really you just use the city as a place to have fun, have gay pride and do drugs, and disciples of Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover, who's like the opposite of Muhammad Ali in terms of his heroism, who basically hounded Stokely Carmichael until Stokely Carmichael had to leave the country. Disciples of Hoover. So really, really nice, just well-explained, well-illustrated. I think this is, do you see what I'm saying about how it's sort of like a step above? I mean, it's more useful, I think, in the fight against injustice, against white privilege, to sort of illustrate the mechanisms of white privilege. And then there's just a straight-up jazz outro. Just some jazz quartet was sampled. I don't know why it's there. Next song is called Rayman Legend, which I think is a reference to a video game. I think there's a video game called Rayman. I don't know. I'm a Nintendo guy, so I've never played Rayman. And this is cool because it's totally different. And in the off chance, you know, that anybody affiliated with him is watching this, this is a really good move. Because having the whole thing be just super militant, super militant, super militant is great. But being able to show a different side and a sense of humor makes it more human, if that makes sense. So like, to know that the person who you're listening to has other sides to them helps you to listen to the side that they want you to listen to, right? So this is just a goofy-ass song about wanting to have sex with a woman, and he brings her back to his apartment, and they start watching Eyes Wide Shut. Like, that's just good comedy. Like, Eyes Wide Shut is a terrible movie on a date. By the way, Eyes Wide Shut, based on this short story by Arthur Schnitzler, which I read last year. I read this story. I watched all the versions of the story. It's a great movie. It's a great movie. He has impeccable taste, but that's not there. Then talks about how he sort of moves the date on to talking about vulnerability. And then he very frankly brags about his own sexual inadequacies. 5-minute man, because her charm was impeccable. Wanted round 2, but I slept like a vegetable. So really nice to have this kind of break it up. And then we immediately get into a song called Trigger Discipline with its nice ride cymbals. And then there's this speech. And I was like, I know this speech. The white man's God asks us to commit crimes, but the God within us wants to do good. Where do I know that speech from? Where do I know that speech from? Where do I know that speech from? From Haitian history. Bois Quémont. The ceremony. Toussaint wasn't actually there, so I'll put him down. At least I don't think he was. It's very confusing what actually happened to Bois Quémont. But the importance of it was a ceremony that set off the revolution against the French, that set off the slave revolt that led to the only successful slave revolt in human history that led to a state. So it has now been characterized as a purely sort of voodoo ritual, but don't make me get started on the racism of how the word voodoo is used and how it's used to disparage important movements. But I really like this because it's an oblique reference, and it definitely calls for something different. You know, this isn't the same thing as calling for jihad. This isn't the exact same fight as Muhammad Ali or as Farrakhan. But it also is, by tying together the idea of the problems and the need for black militants, tying it together with the Haitian Revolution is in and of itself an interesting idea and perhaps a necessary one. It's a great quote. The God within us wants to do good. Next song is called Face Off. It's a dramatic retelling of the John Travolta-Nicolas Cage movie. I'm joking. Face Off has got this cool pitched up sample. Again, sort of a drilly bass. His voice is a little different. He sounds really hungry here. He really develops the sample nicely. At times, like, the production is very delicate. And the line I have here in my notes is that this guy really works at his craft. You know, he doesn't just put a beat out there. You know, he really works it. He really reworks it. He really triple works it. And especially at the end here, where he slows down this sample that is already pitched up, but it doesn't sound normal. So how do you do that? How do you take something that's at 0 and then pitch it up to 1.5 and then pitch that down 1.5 and have it not be at 0 again? I don't know, but that's what he did. And I just shook the whole camera. There's an interesting sample from the song, There's a Stranger in My House. I'm not sample snitching. That's what the guy actually says. I do wonder, because this guy is super duper duper well educated and informed. I mean, again, I don't know where he was educated, right? I don't know anything about this guy. I barely even know he's from Philadelphia. But there's actually a pretty interesting sermon by the Reverend Dr. Michael Eric Dyson called There's a Stranger in My House. I don't know. There's a chance there's overlap there. In the case that I'm right, that'd be pretty wild. Next song is called Sir Douglas Mawson. Great drum loop to start, and then it kind of settles into this very unsettling beat with this like these great backwards sounds. I don't know why he called it Sir Douglas Mawson. I looked it up and I tried to figure it out. He's some Australian dude who found parts of Antarctica. Great sort of drums with this weird sample. And then I was listening to this song, and then I didn't know what it meant. I didn't really know what it was about. It seemed to be about education. It seemed to be about this. Remember how I said this guy watches television? And you movin' like Du Quan since you worried about the stench. Du Quan. You might not remember who Du Quan is. You probably remember who Mr. Przybylewski is. If I tell you Mr. Przybylewski, you might go, oh, Du Quan. Because everybody who quotes The Wire, everybody's Stringer Bell. Everybody's Stringer Bell. Or whatever, the guy who's coming. What's his name? Come on. Michael K. Williams' character, the guy who's coming. How do I remember Stringer Bell, but I forget the name of the most famous character? I know why, because I keep thinking of Benny the Butcher, because I think that's where he took his quote. Anyways, you know, like everyone remembers certain characters from The Wire, but Du Quan was one of those kids from that season of The Wire that all took place in the school. Probably my favorite season of the show because it was most clearly illustrating the systematic failures of the school systems. So Du Quan was the guy that, like, Przybylewski got him clothes and he got a sense of well-being, and then they pushed him forward, and then he failed, and then he ended up being a drug dealer, and then he ended up becoming a junkie. And so, it's, you know, I've got a lot of problems with The Wire. I don't think it's actually a particularly good TV show. But it does do certain things amazingly well. And certainly Du Quan is one of the great characters because you feel the most for him because you really see his path. And so that recontextualizes this whole song to be a point where you sort of understand it as a song about these systematic failures. And then you go back to the lyrics and you look at the lyrics and it's about the failures of the American school system in the inner city. So good. I want more songs like that. Next song is called Mimicry of the Settlers. Nice bass drums, sweeping horns. This is the most politically overt song, but it's geopolitical. It's not really about America. I mean, it is about America, but not just. This might be the least interesting beat with the most interesting lyrics. The beat's still good, but I don't like it as much as the rest of them. Belgium should atone for the sins committed on Congo. Yeah. I don't know if you ever study Congo. Belgium, yeah. I mean, there's no good colonizers, but there are some decolonizers who did worse than the other people who did terribly. And as a matter of fact, you actually see all that in the great movie When We Were Kings, starring Muhammad Ali and George Foreman. Anyways, this is very true. Viva Fidel Castro, no, that ain't a typo, so he's sort of overt communist. Government officials hoping that I let the mic go. Red tide won't calm till it hits AFRICOM. Do my dance when France gets bombed. So, you know, this is, as far as I can tell, the only real call for terrorism. I mean, he mentions jihad before. As somebody who studies French, lives in France, whose son was in France for a month, who has a lot of French friends, this, I mean, I get it. I get what he's saying. But the people who really suffer from terrorism are the Muslims in France. like those are the people whose lives, whenever there's terrorist attacks, those are the people who are like really, really hurt, really marginalized, really prejudiced against. Like every terrorist attack on French soil does 10,000 times the damage to Muslims living in France than it does to the families of the people who were murdered. Like, it's really bad. I might have been overstating it, but it's really bad. So, I don't know. But hey, art is supposed to upset. And that upsets me. That upset me more than him saying he wants to kill crackers. And I'm a cracker, you know? I guess because I empathize for my French Muslim friends who have it rough in that terribly racist society, like ours. Next song is called I Personally Would Not Have Released John McCain. There's a band out of Boston called Anal C-Word, and they actually have the word C-Word as a punk band, and all their songs were 10 seconds long. And they were really, like, provocative, like Eazy-E got AIDS from Freddie Mercury, and I hope your child dies, lyrics like that. This feels like that kind of punk title. Great kind of heavy bass drum, 80s style. This is very kind of vaporwave. I have gone the longest that anyone has gone in describing this guy's music without using the words JPEG Mafia. I don't actually think there's that much of a crossover other than the fact that they're both very talented and they both produce their own beats, and I guess they both vary between electronic and hip-hop and stuff. But maybe this song maybe has most of that feeling. Rebellion won't have come from an office, risking their life for crackers like Pocahontas. There's great attack in his voice on this song, and I really love the weird sounds and another great bass change. Maybe the best sample on the entire album here. He makes reference to Smitty Werber-Jaggergensen, which is this character from SpongeBob. I was too old to see SpongeBob when it came out, but I was just the right age for my kids to watch SpongeBob, so I appreciate the SpongeBob. I get the urge to tell these crackers what we finna do, Anglo-anathema. Anglo-anathema, that's a good way to put it. Tie Your Camel, Trust in God is the next song, another sort of interlude. I can't tell who it's from, kind of a stuttered sample in the back. Then Luminescence peers through the confinement, featuring Jacob Sunshine, I think he's just playing guitar. And then there's this quote at the beginning, I was born into this world to share my pain. And I thought about it, I'm like, I don't know who said this, I don't know where this is from, who said it, I was born into this world to share my pain. And then I listened to it this morning and I got you. It's Willem Dafoe in Last Temptation of Christ. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure. I listened to it again. And say what you will about Christianity. I got a lot of problems with Christianity. I consider myself a Christian. I got a lot of problems. But the idea that Jesus was put on earth to share in human suffering, that's a pretty good thing for a God to do. So, yeah. More questions of trauma. What's the price of trauma? Kind of a breezy beat, nice chorus sounds. And then this crazy sample, these weird voices. I mean, really one of the craziest samples I have ever heard on any hip-hop album ever, but it's well done. And then this great guitar solo, which even sounds almost Middle Eastern in its tonality. And then at the end, you hear somebody practicing to speak Arabic. It's one of my favorite things as a language teacher, of all the interesting things about the Nation of Islam and the teaching of Islamic faith to Americans, whether they be black or not, is the push to learn Arabic and the experience of seeing people trying to learn a language always makes me happy. So I like hearing them practice this. Then there's a triumphant closer song, Shirk, pitched up sample, different kind of triplet flow here, great synthesizers at the end. Save me the tears, white folks, keep me out of your prayers. You still love me, Stokely? Stomp a Nazi in my Prada, swear we everything you not, all the shooters in Valhalla, watching they children smile, swear the vengeance finds their way through inner workings of jihad. Interesting idea, the idea of mixing together jihad and Valhalla. So it's sort of like talking about the idea of jihad, which some members of the Muslim faith believe that if you die in the service of promoting Islam, you go to heaven and are rewarded in different ways. And that's kind of tied into the idea of Valhalla. So he's kind of doing an interesting sort of like cross-religious concept here. And then there's just a straight samples, well, not straight, it's pitched up a little bit of Public Enemy, which helps to remind me of the Public Enemy connections here. Gave you soul on a rope, but you sold it like soap on a rope. I never understood what that line meant anyways. What is soul on a rope? But, oh. No, I still don't get it. And my hope is that this guy becomes as popular as Public Enemy. I think we need more characters like this. I think we need to have uncomfortable debates. I think we need to contend with the consequences of continued systematic racism and white supremacy. And we need to keep working at that intersection, because it might lead to good. All right. 44 minutes. The album's only 33. You should have been listening to his album instead. All right. Until next time, there's the camera.